Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for the Mindfly and the Daily Critique. This is a question-based critique today. The image was submitted by Cam, who is an advanced photographer from California. Cam shot this with a Leic S2, an effective focal length of 56 millimeters, ISO 160 f16, and 12 seconds is the exposure information that we have, and Cam lets us know that he used a variable neutral density filter here to slow his shutter down this far. I'm going to paraphrase now Cam's backstory and his question so that we can understand what the main subject of this image was and then get to the question, which is going to be the heart of the critique today. In his backstory, Cam lets us know he shot this on Kiawah Island in South Carolina. He says that his main idea here was to use the water in the sky to create an impressionistic image with a pastel color palette. I think he's done a beautiful job of doing that here. I'm really enjoying moving from cyans to subtle greens to blue greens up to the pastel blue in the sky, and then to versions sort of pastel peach and pink. Really beautiful pastel color palette. Paraphrasing Cam's question here, says he hasn't done this before, so he'd enjoy some feedback. One of the things he was curious about is it too abstract, and is it so abstract does it need to be part of a series to orient the viewer? My answer really sort of goes in an opposite direction. I think I would like to present this in a way where it even becomes more abstract, and a lot of that just has to do with, first of all, what Cam is saying is his main idea here. He's talking about color. So color is an element of design, and when we start to look at a photograph and we start to pay more attention to the intrinsic nature of things within the concept of the overall image or overall idea, that is the very nature of pushing towards the abstract. And when Cam talks about this image, he's really talking about an impression of color. So we're talking about the intrinsic quality, or one of the powerful intrinsic qualities of this scene, and that is one way to abstract some version of reality with your camera. Part of the reason why I want to push more towards that is that for me, if the main subject is the subtle suggestion of these pastel colors, an impression of these colors, and I know for a fact that when it comes to viewer bias, that the viewer is drawn to the area or areas of highest contrast. In the most basic way that we think about contrast, the difference between light and dark, the vast majority of that contrast in this image is down here in the lower part where we're seeing the tidal pattern. To me, all at one time, this part of the image is doing a lot of things to take away from the overall feeling that Cam said he was going for. It's very high contrast down in here, so it really takes me away from being able to appreciate as much as I feel like I could without it, the subtleties and not only color differences but in texture differences when we look at the different bands up here. The other thing that this is doing is it's sort of pulling me away from the impression of color and making this more ordinary. To me, this is the most literal part of this scene, these very definite tidal patterns on the beach. If I use the crop tool to get rid of that, another thing that I feel like is going to happen, let's just go ahead and crop the bottom part away, is that as I crop, start to create a relationship between water and sky that's a little bit more even. And to me, that is also more abstract. In the original crop, to me this looks more like a literal scenic where it is a lot about beach, and now as I crop and I start to give the sky and the water more equal weight, then the very literal concept of sky and water starts to go away a little bit. I think you could push this even more and go all the way towards something that was closer to 50-50. I think it might continue to push this more towards this very, very subtle impression of beautiful soft color changes and very subtle texture changes. Interesting thing to me about the very end of Cam's question is he said, does this need to be part of a series to orient the viewer? Clearly I'm pushing more towards the abstract, but I truly believe that shots like this that are abstract, that are very subtle, or almost pushing towards something that could just be painted bands of color with slight texture changes, I do think that these kinds of images or impressions can work very well in series. It could be a mini folio, so this is presented as a whole series of pictures, or it could be multiple images on one canvas like a diptych or a triptych. I think it would be beautiful to visit this idea or revisit this idea if it's practical for Cam, so that the camera is set in almost the same exact place. Maybe it's more of a traditional 35mm framing, but you shoot 50-50, and the only thing that's changing is the textures and the colors. You still are working with a soft color palette. You're still doing a long exposure. You still have very, very subtle changes when it comes to color and texture, but they are different because they've been shot on different days or at different times. And then a really powerful thing to do would be to get the viewer to move even further into these subtle changes, because you let the viewer know, look, this has been shot in the same way at the same place. And what I really want you to do as you go from one frame to the next is to just enjoy how at each different time or on each different day these very powerful intrinsic parts of this scene, the textures that can be expressed over this amount of time, and the colors, how they are changing. Love to hear your feedback about the video today. Love where Cam started. Really beautiful image. From a color standpoint, the impression of color is very powerful. I love the subtlety of this image, the softness of it. I want to say a big thank you to Cam. I want to say a big thank you to you for being here. Hope to see you again very soon on the Mindfly.